There are moments in history when silence breaks not with whispers but with a roar. For Africa, that roar has often come from young leaders who dared to defy the empire's shadow. Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Thomas Sankara here in Burkina Faso. And now in 2025, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 37 years old, has stepped onto the same battlefield of ideas, courage, and blood. 3 years after seizing power, he sat before more than a dozen journalists in Ouagadougou, not as a distant ruler hiding behind armored walls, but as a soldier among his people. His voice steady against the weight of assassination plots, foreign meddling, and internal betrayal. "I am not afraid," he declared, eyes locked on the press. His words cut through the room like steel. If you hesitate, you compromise. And once compromise sets in, you are done for. For older Americans who remember the Cold War, who watched African leaders fall one after another to coups and accidents orchestrated in the shadows, this moment feels eerily familiar. A young revolutionary standing tall against impossible odds. A country rich in gold and land, yet encircled by foreign military bases. And a people who believe, perhaps for the first time in decades, that they can reclaim what was stolen. But history asks us hard questions. Can Ibrahim Traoré escape the fate of Sankara, Gaddafi, and Lumumba? Or is he simply the next target in a long line of African giants cut down before their dreams could take root? And perhaps the more urgent question for us sitting far away in America is this: what role do we play, directly or indirectly, in shaping that fate? Do our taxes fund the very bases Traoré warns are strangling his revolution? Do our headlines reduce a people's struggle to a single word, junta? Or can we choose to listen, to understand, to stand with those who demand sovereignty in a world that too often denies it? This is not just a story about Burkina Faso. It is about the soul of Africa and the choices of a world that claims to stand for freedom while often undermining it. And it is about you, the listener, because history has a way of repeating itself unless we choose to break the cycle. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré entered the room for his marathon press conference, the air carried both tension and anticipation. 3 years had passed since his dramatic takeover of power in 2022, and the nation of Burkina Faso had been transformed into a lightning rod for debates on sovereignty, security, and the future of Africa itself. For the Western media, he is often framed as a junta leader. For his supporters, he is the living echo of Thomas Sankara, the charismatic revolutionary who once tried to remake Burkina Faso before being cut down in 1987. On this day in Ouagadougou, Traoré's message was not one of hesitation or compromise. It was one of defiance. Journalists pressed him on the danger he faced. After all, in 2025, alone, several coup attempts had been reported and foiled. Assassination plots whispered through the military ranks. Foreign intelligence services were said to be circling just as they had with Sankara, Lumumba, and Gaddafi. When asked if he ever felt fear, Traoré responded with a simple truth: "I am not afraid." His reasoning was as revealing as it was revolutionary. "I trust the people," he said. "It is the people who entrusted us with this mission. If you hesitate, you compromise. And once compromise sets in, you are done for." In those few sentences, he set the tone not only for his leadership, but for an entire generation of Africans who see him as a symbol of courage in the face of empire. The heart of Traoré's claim is security, specifically the creation of a self-reliant military. He reminded the press that for decades, African armies had been trained abroad, shaped by doctrines written in Paris, Washington, or Brussels. If you let your forces be trained by other powers, they indoctrinate them as they please. And it is easier to manipulate them, he warned. Burkina Faso, under his command, had broken that cycle. A higher military institute was established, training a new generation of soldiers entirely within the country. He himself participated in the training of some of these forces. The goal was simple: a national army loyal to its soil, not to foreign masters. This was not just rhetoric. To Traoré, foreign training programs had been pipelines for infiltration tools used by imperialist powers to destabilize governments and control resources. By cutting that cord, he sought to build what he called a mindset of purpose among soldiers. If we know why we are fighting, who we are up against, and why this pressure exists, people understand better, he explained. That clarity of purpose, he insisted, was now present in Burkina Faso's ranks. But the press conference did not stop at military matters. Traoré situated his struggle within a broader historical arc. He invoked the names of Africa's fallen giants: Lumumba in 1961, Nkrumah in 1972, Sankara in 1987, Gaddafi in 2011. Each, he argued, was removed not by fate, but by deliberate foreign intervention, aided by traitors from within. They always manipulate from within, he reminded the journalists. The lesson was clear. Vigilance was not optional. It was survival. For ordinary Burkinabe, this was more than a political speech. It was reassurance. They had watched foreign troops come and go, had seen their resources drained, and had endured years of violence from extremist groups thriving in power vacuums. To hear their president declare, "We will do everything to always stay ahead of imperialism's actions," was to hear a promise that the cycle could finally be broken. Yet, beneath the strength of his words lingered a haunting question. Could he truly survive what history had already written for so many others? Could a young leader in a small West African nation outmaneuver the immense weight of foreign powers, regional rivals, and internal dissent? This was the stage Traoré set in his press conference, a battle not just for Burkina Faso's sovereignty, but for the very idea that Africa could stand unbroken even when surrounded. As the press conference unfolded, the questions turned from personal survival to regional survival. The stakes grew larger. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just defending himself. He was defending the future of an entire alliance of nations. When asked about the positioning of American and French military bases across West Africa, Traoré did not mince words. He listed them plainly: a camp in northern Côte d'Ivoire, new units in Senegal, a growing presence in Benin, all encircling the young alliance of Sahel states AES formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. "I feel that the AES countries are being encircled," he said, his tone both matter-of-fact and defiant. For him, this was not paranoia. It was a logic that surrounds us, a logic that tries to bring us down. To the watching world, this was the high point of the press conference, the moment when Traoré directly confronted the might of the West. He accused imperial powers of deliberately surrounding his revolution, using neighboring African leaders as proxies. He recalled the patronizing advice African states had long been given. "You shouldn't arm yourselves. You don't need to be militarized. We will provide security for you." This, he argued, was the oldest colonial trap of all: disarm the continent, then save it when chaos erupts. But Traoré flipped the script. "There is no state if there isn't a strong army," he insisted. Burkina Faso, unlike so many of its neighbors, was building its own army from the ground up. Soldiers trained locally, commanders loyal to their homeland, strategies developed from battlefield experience, not from foreign textbooks. His voice rose as he declared, "The world's greatest powers now want to come and train with us. They want to learn how we do things. But today, no one knows how our commandos are trained, how we equip them." It was a striking reversal. A small, landlocked country, once dismissed as one of the poorest in the world, was suddenly claiming to hold military expertise that global superpowers wanted to study. Whether this was exaggeration or reality, it sent a message: Burkina Faso was no longer the pupil. It was becoming the teacher. The international reaction was swift, though rarely public. American officials had previously warned about the militarization of West Africa, hinting that countries like Burkina Faso risked destabilizing the region by pursuing independent defense policies. French media outlets painted Traoré as reckless, a populist gambling with his country's survival. Meanwhile, Russian and Chinese diplomats quietly celebrated his words. Both Moscow and Beijing had already opened doors for scholarships, weapons transfers, and even nuclear training programs for Burkinabe students. The tension only grew when the conversation turned to the African Union. Burkina Faso had been suspended after Traoré's rise to power, left in what he called complete radio silence. When asked if his country should follow the example of ECOWAS and withdraw entirely, his answer carried the sharpness of both anger and patience. "We don't even know if we are in the Union or not. No one talks to us. If we leave, we want to explain why. We want to hear from them first. But if their actions are against Africa's interests, why should we remain?" Here, the contrast was unmistakable. While Western governments often described Burkina Faso as isolated, Traoré painted the opposite picture. It was not his nation that abandoned Africa, but Africa's institutions that abandoned him. The African Union, he argued, had lost its revolutionary soul, preferring silence over solidarity. For his supporters, this was the climax of the press conference. A fearless young leader standing up to empires, regional alliances, and even continental institutions. For his critics, it was proof that Traoré was steering Burkina Faso into dangerous waters, alienating allies, and courting great powers who had their own agendas. The emotional intensity reached its peak when a journalist asked him to reassure those who feared for his life. Could he promise to endure to survive long enough to finish his mission? His answer was layered with both defiance and humility. Security was not just the task of guards or generals. "It is a matter for the whole people," he said. "We have read a lot about everything imperialism has destroyed, and we have learned many lessons. That is why we say we won't let things repeat themselves." In that moment, Traoré was no longer speaking only to Burkinabe. He was speaking to Africans across the continent, and to anyone in the world who has watched history's cycles of hope and betrayal. The climax of his press conference was not simply a speech. It was a challenge, a declaration that imperialism would be resisted no matter the cost. While the headlines often focus on Traoré's fiery clashes with foreign powers, the most profound consequences of his revolution are being felt at home, beyond speeches and military maneuvers. Burkina Faso is undergoing a social and political transformation that touches land livelihoods and the very structure of authority. One of the most controversial and ambitious steps has been the national land reform. For decades, land disputes tore villages and families apart. Farmers fought with machetes. Real estate developers multiplied overnight, buying and reselling land with little oversight. Even in the cities, one plot could be sold to multiple buyers, fueling endless conflict. Traoré's government declared that the land belongs to the state, a move that shocked developers but relieved many rural families. A new digital registry was launched to prevent duplicate sales, and traditional chiefs were given renewed authority to mediate disputes. For elders who felt ignored during years of political corruption, this was a restoration of dignity. For many ordinary citizens, it was a signal that the government was willing to confront chaos head-on. Yet such reforms carry risk. Developers and politicians who once profited from land speculation now stand to lose billions. Resentment simmers beneath the surface. Supporters cheer the courage of this move. Opponents whisper that it is sowing new seeds of instability. If land is the soil of Burkina Faso, gold is its bloodstream. For years, foreign companies controlled the mines, with Burkina receiving barely 10% of profits, and often without transparency. Traoré's government began reclaiming control, co-exploiting mines, and ensuring revenues entered state coffers. Mines that had closed during years of insecurity reopened. For the first time in years, there was talk not of foreign extraction, but of national ownership. This was more than economics, it was identity. A people once stripped of their wealth could now believe they were taking back what was rightfully theirs. But again, the stakes were high. Foreign corporations and their backers abroad rarely surrender such profits willingly. The government, by challenging these structures, was painting a target on itself. On the streets and in the markets, Burkinabe measured progress not in speeches, but in millet and maize prices. Traoré himself admitted that macroeconomic statistics mean little if a mother cannot afford food for her children. Agricultural reforms and new secured zones allowed for increased harvests, Prices for staple foods began to ease, giving families a small but tangible sense of relief. For a country that had known years of violence and scarcity, these changes were more than numbers. They were survival. Farmers who once abandoned their land returned to plant again. Traders in markets spoke cautiously of better days. Still, the economy remains fragile. One attack by extremists can close a road, disrupt a harvest, or spike food prices overnight. Stability is as precious as gold and just as vulnerable. Burkina Faso is not only a state, it is a tapestry of ethnic groups, traditions, and communities. Politicians in the past often manipulated chiefs, using them as tools for power. Traoré's reforms sought to restore their honor and role. Traditional leaders were given legal recognition and responsibilities in conflict resolution. Symbols of respect were reinstated, reminding people that chieftaincy was not a relic, but a pillar of unity. For villagers divided by politics, this was healing. For many elders, it was justice after years of marginalization. Yet some modern voices, urban youth-educated elites, wonder whether empowering chiefs risks slowing progress. The revolution, they argue, must look forward, not backward. Politically, Traoré's approach consolidates support among the poor, rural, and patriotic. But it also isolates elites, urban intellectuals, and opposition figures. Critics say his government suppresses dissent, pointing to restrictions on some media and political activity. Supporters counter that survival requires unity, and that freedom without security is meaningless. In this fragile balance, Burkina Faso stands at a crossroads. The reforms promise justice, dignity, and sovereignty, but they also risk backlash from those who feel excluded or threatened. For every family relieved by lower food prices, there is a developer angry at lost profits. For every chief who feels respected again, there is a politician whose influence has waned. The question is not whether Traoré's policies have impacted; they clearly do. The question is whether they can endure long enough to transform society, or whether they will collapse under the combined weight of resistance from within and pressure from abroad. From the outside, Traoré's revolution looks very different depending on where you stand. In Washington, it is viewed through the lens of security strategy and great power competition. American generals and diplomats have long argued that West Africa needs stability, not militarization. When Traoré insists that a state cannot exist without a strong army, many in the U.S. see a dangerous path that could fuel more conflict. Yet for his supporters, America's bases in Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire are not symbols of safety, but of domination. And here lies the uncomfortable question for American citizens: are we protecting Africa, or are we trapping it in dependency? For France, the loss is both symbolic and material. Once the colonial power in Burkina Faso, Paris was forced to withdraw its troops in 2023 under popular pressure. For many French officials, this was a humiliating setback, part of a larger erosion of influence across the Sahel. French media still call Traoré a junta leader, framing him as reckless and illegitimate. But in Ouagadougou's streets, his expulsion of French forces is remembered as a liberation, a moment when the country took back control of its soil. Russia and China, meanwhile, see opportunity. Moscow provides training weapons and scholarships in nuclear and military sciences. Beijing invests in infrastructure and technology. Both present themselves as partners rather than masters, even if their motives are strategic. For Traoré, such partnerships are less about ideology than survival. If the West closes doors, others will open them. For the people of Burkina Faso, the hope is that these new alliances will not repeat the old patterns of exploitation. On the global stage, the contrast is striking. In Europe and America, Traoré is portrayed as a radical populist. In parts of Africa and the diaspora, he is hailed as a lion of sovereignty. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between. What is undeniable is that his revolution has forced the world to look again at a country many had ignored. And for Americans watching from afar, the story poses a personal question. Is this simply another chapter in the Cold War being replayed in Africa with new players in Moscow and Beijing? Or is it a rare chance for the continent to chart its own destiny, free from all outside control. The press conference ended not with whispers, but with a challenge that still echoes far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has placed himself on the front line of history, a young soldier president declaring war on fear, corruption, and imperial designs. For many Africans, he is a symbol of rebirth, the proof that sovereignty is not a dream, but a duty. For his enemies, he is a dangerous rebel who dares to rewrite the rules of global power. Yet history is cruel to revolutionaries. Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Muammar Gaddafi all stood defiant, only to be silenced. Each left behind a legacy, but also a warning. Courage alone does not guarantee survival. As Traoré himself admitted, imperialism always works from within, always waits for hesitation, always seeks betrayal. The question is whether Burkina Faso and Africa at large can finally escape the cycle. For older Americans watching this story, it feels both distant and familiar. We remember the Cold War, the proxy battles fought on African soil, the promises of freedom that often ended in tragedy. And now, once again, the world's powers gather around this small country, each calculating what can be gained or lost. Should America continue to keep its bases across West Africa? Or should it respect the will of nations like Burkina Faso? Should we accept the official headlines that dismiss Traoré as a junta leader? Or should we listen more closely to the voices of people who say he is their hope? Burkina Faso today stands as a mirror. It reflects Africa's struggle for self-reliance, but it also reflects our own choices as global citizens. Do we support a world where small nations can rise? Or do we continue to tolerate systems that crush them before they can breathe? And so I leave you with a question. Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's reforms, his battle for land, for gold, for dignity, can truly endure? Or will history repeat itself, cutting him down like those before him? Please share this video if you feel that you are one of the first to recognize and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. Because in the end, this is not just a story about one man. It is about Africa's dawn breaking once again. And the world must decide, will we let it rise, or will we let it be silenced?